Right, so this is why we're asking the question. Today is International Day of the Girl Child, a campaign spearheaded by UNICEF. It's marked on the 11th of October every year to encourage human rights for girls. To discuss the importance of this day in South Africa, we're joined by gender activist Zulaikha Patel. Patel, you may recall, made headlines in 2016 when, at the age of 13, she led a group of Pretoria Girls High School pupils against the school's hair policy. Teachers had told black learners that their hair needed to be tamed. The subsequent demonstration led to a change in school policy, also an inquiry into claims of racism, and she hasn't stopped protesting for human rights. Zulaikha, you join us from Pretoria. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. You made headlines at age 13. How old are you now?
Thank you very much. I am currently 17 years old.
And just take us back. I mean, you've been praised for what you did there. The president even saying it raised so many pertinent issues. But it was brave to protest in the first place. It's led to lots of other things for you. Just take us back to those first few days, how it felt to start that demonstration.
Well, I mean, basically, for me, growing up, I had constantly been conscientized by my parents, and so I grew up in a very conscious home, and so it wasn't something new to me. I'd always been exposed to these issues. I mean, I started reading from a very young age, and so the reading material that I'd found at home was basically newspapers, and what I was seeing in newspapers was issues taking place in our society. And so I was already from an early age open to what was happening and taking place in my society. And from a young age, I'd felt a deep calling and passion to heal society and to liberate and to fight for the rights of women and young black youth. And so a lot of things built up to the demonstration that took place from the 26th of August 2016 till the 29th of August 2016. And so it was a build-up of constantly experiencing institutionalized racism in schools, because I mean, as youth currently, we are fed this illusion of democracy and that we are born free. And currently, what I always say and how I feel is that the continuous act from society of calling us born frees keeps us blindfolded by the harsh effects of apartheid. And so for me, I experienced institutionalized racism so harshly that it was too painful for me to refer to myself as a born free. And so for me, on the day when we had been threatened with arrest, I was 13 at the time, and when I processed that in my mind, I knew that this was bigger than me. This was a bigger fight. This was a bigger cause, and it was beyond me. And I was prepared to lay down my own life for this cause, because I felt a very deep connection with the cause. And I knew this wasn't for myself, but I was obligated to do this for future generations that are yet to come and occupy this society.
So what has been the change? I don't know if you're still at the school. Did you notice it led to a broader change even?
So for me, the change hasn't necessarily taken place within the school. The culture is still instilled and it's still the same. But I've seen change outside. I've seen more and more young people every day stand firm in what they believe in, passionately defend causes that they stand for, and take a rise and challenge systems of injustice in society. And I've seen more and more young black women express their identities freely and unapologetically. And that for me is absolutely heartwarming. And that just shows me how much work still needs to be done.
Then let's fast forward to last year. There was misinformation that you were going to protest naked in Pretoria. In fact, it was a clothed protest, but against gender-based violence. So your activism has grown. Is that your main focus right now? Do you see yourself as a gender activist?
I am an unapologetic radical black feminist. I stand firm in fighting for the rights of young black women, and young black women are my cause. I am unapologetic about my feminism all the time. And so that is a cause that I'm deep rooted in, and it is a cause I continue to champion every day. And last year's protest was firstly to educate society about consent, and to also further push a message to society that rape is never the victim's fault in any instance, and clothing is not consent in any instance. And the government needs to prioritize educating people on consent, and educating townships and rural communities on what consent is, because consent is so broad. Consent is not clothing. Consent is given when sober. Consent is not given underage. Consent is not necessarily being married to a person. Being married to a person, you still have the right to say no. And so last year's protest was aimed at that. And yes, there was rumors that I was going to protest naked. For me, that didn't bother me that those rumors existed, because personally I feel that women in South Africa have nothing to hide anymore. We live every day living as a woman in South Africa. You live to survive. Every day is a tossed coin between, am I going to get raped or brutalized, or am I going to come back home? Am I going to come back home alive? And so for me, that just shows how much there's absolutely nothing for women in South Africa to be hiding anymore. We've got absolutely no dignity. Our dignity is stripped away from us continuously, every day, every second, every minute.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I wanted to ask you, and maybe just tell me more. I'm interested in what you thought about the reaction to the fake news, as it were, that you were going to protest naked. I mean, some people were outraged, some people supportive. It really sparked a lot of emotion. What did you think about that?
For me, my first reaction was, I first actually laughed about it with my co-planner Boitumelo Tage, who is also a feminist and an activist who inspires me quite a lot. We actually first laughed about it, and then when we thought about this deeper, I did not understand why people were so appalled, because as a young woman, I have absolutely no dignity left in my country. I mean, every day, every minute, every second, my sisters are brutalized and murdered. And so for me as well, I didn't understand why people felt liberty over my body and what I should be doing with my body. Even if I was going to protest naked, for example, if I was, where would the problem be? Because it's my body, my rules, my consent. Young girls should be the only ones taking that liberty in their hands and making the choices about their bodies. No one else, just them.
Zulaikha, today is International Day of the Girl Child. What does that mean for you as a young activist in South Africa? What do you think it should mean for all of us in South Africa?
Firstly, in this current state in South Africa, we've got absolutely nothing to celebrate. We have got absolutely nothing to celebrate. So today, I am not celebrating, but in fact, I want to know from people, what are we doing and what can we still do? How can we protect young girls? Are we creating solutions? Because for me, it is pointless to rant on about matters, yet we're not coming up with protective measures for young girls. There are schools in rural areas where young girls have to travel in groups to the bathrooms because their rapists are waiting them in the bathrooms. What are we doing about that? Is our campaigning towards gender-based violence only showcasing what takes place in urban areas? Are we also giving girls in rural areas a platform to talk about their matters? Are we focusing on young girls in rural areas where their rapists are their fathers and their uncles and their brothers? Are we going to give them a platform and actually defend victims of such rape? And so for me today, basically, I feel I have a very strong feeling about what are we still doing, and is the government prioritizing young girls? Because I mean, it's pointless to tell us that we are living in a democracy, yet young women in this country and young girls are not experiencing democracy. Young girls have to skip school because they cannot afford sanitary towels, which are seen as a luxury, yet they are a right, because menstruation isn't a choice. And so I think that we need to prioritize the education of young girls by making sanitary towels free. Because if condoms are free, then sanitary towels equally need to be free, because sex is a choice and menstruation isn't a choice. And young girls are missing out on their education each time they have to skip school because of that. And so if you want to tell young girls to celebrate democracy and feel good about democracy, then the only way to do that is to prioritize their education.
Yeah. Well, what would you say? So you've got a message for government that's coming through clearly. What about individuals, older people like me, men as well? What is your message? The issues are so real, and there's so many of them. Where do we start if we want to be part of the change?
I think we need to, we talk enough. We talk enough. We need to tackle these issues head on and begin to act. It is possible. It is possible for us to eradicate gender-based violence. The question is do we want to actually do it? Do we want to actually get there and get our hands dirty and grab the bull by its horns? And we need to take these issues back. I've always believed, personally as an activist who passionately speaks about Black consciousness, mental liberation, mental emancipation, I believe that we need to take this back and think deeper. Our country is naturally a violent state. We cannot just be surprised when violence occurs in our country. We cannot say that it's been 25 years after a very violent system and expect the system to just evaporate into thin air. We need to understand that we are living in a post-apartheid era, and which is very destructive, because we currently are suffering from denialism, and we've basically taken in all this facade of democracy that we are free. Freedom, we haven't achieved freedom as long as women continue to experience injustice head on and women are still oppressed. We have not achieved freedom, and we cannot continue to tell this generation that they are born free, yet they live to survive, and women cannot walk in streets or be free in their personal space. And so I think that we need to take this back, and we need to understand that there are people who are suffering from perpetual trauma based on the traumas that they suffered being brutalized, because we cannot expect to walk out of plus 400 years of constantly being brutalized and a violent system and expect to be okay and expect to be this beautiful free society. We cannot expect that. And so we need to take these matters back and to understand where we come from, because if we understand where we come from, we can understand why we are in this current present that we are in, and we can then understand our future. So we need to take these issues back, and we need to understand that colonization and apartheid had an impact on the Black man's identity. It had rendered the Black man to being criminals. And so when we say men are trash, how can we not expect men are trash to be? How can we not expect them to be trash? Because during colonization and apartheid, and even now, that mentality still has been pushed forward strongly, that all Black men are criminals. And so obviously that has had an effect on their psyche. And so we need to understand that people are suffering from perpetual trauma, and we need to deal with this matter deeper, and take these issues back and understand where we come from.
All right. Thank you for that very strong message coming through there. International Day of the Girl Child, and that was young gender activist Zulaikha Patel. We take a short break. We'll be back.